In late Victorian England, the role of a governess occupied a peculiar and often uncomfortable position within society. She was neither servant nor family, educated yet dependent, respected in theory, but frequently isolated in practice. Living under the same roof as her employers, she existed on the margins of household life, present yet unseen, trusted yet alone. It was within this fragile social space that the story of the governess found dead in the attic began. The house itself stood on the edge of a growing provincial town, far enough from the bustle of the high street to remain quiet, yet close enough to be considered respectable. Built several decades earlier, it was tall and narrow, with a brick facade darkened by soot and time. Inside, the rooms were arranged vertically, each floor serving a distinct purpose: the family below, servants in the rear, and above them all, the attic used for storage, trunks, and the occasional guest when necessity demanded. By the early 1890s, the household was considered stable and unremarkable. The master of the house was a professional man, well regarded in the community, his income sufficient to support his wife, children, and staff. His wife managed the domestic affairs with discipline and restraint, adhering closely to the expectations of middle-class respectability. Appearances mattered greatly, and nothing within the household was permitted to threaten that carefully maintained image. The governess arrived quietly, as governesses often did. She was in her mid-20s, educated, reserved, and described by those who later recalled her as capable and well-spoken. Her responsibility was to instruct the two younger children in reading, arithmetic, handwriting, and moral conduct. She took her meals alone or with the children, retired early, and spent most of her free time in her room or preparing lessons. From the beginning, she occupied a small bedroom on the upper floor, just below the attic. It was a modest space, sparsely furnished, with a narrow bed, a small desk, and a single window that looked out over the rear of the property. She was rarely seen in the public rooms of the house and had little contact with visitors or neighbors. To the outside world, nothing appeared unusual. Yet within the house, subtle tensions existed. Servants later spoke of a persistent sense of discomfort surrounding the governess's position. She was polite but distant. She did not form friendships with the other staff, nor was she treated as an equal by the family. Her presence was tolerated rather than welcomed, and her role left her vulnerable, dependent on the household for both livelihood and shelter, with no immediate family nearby. In Victorian England, such arrangements were common, but they carried unspoken risks. A governess lived under constant observation, subject to scrutiny and rumor, yet possessed little authority or protection. Any perceived impropriety, real or imagined, could have devastating consequences. Weeks passed, then months. The governess performed her duties without complaint. She was punctual, methodical, and reportedly devoted to her work. However, there were signs that something was amiss. On more than one occasion, servants noticed her appearing anxious or withdrawn. She was seen ascending the stairs toward the attic at unusual hours, sometimes late in the evening, carrying books or personal items. When asked about this, she offered no explanation, and none was pressed. The attic itself was not a place meant for daily use. It was dimly lit, accessed by a narrow staircase, and filled with old furniture, trunks, and discarded household items. Dust lay thick on the beams, and the air was cold even in warmer months. It was not a place where one lingered. Then, one morning, the routine of the house was disturbed. The governess did not appear for breakfast. At first, this was not considered alarming. She was known to keep irregular hours and occasionally took her meals privately. When she failed to arrive for the children's lessons, however, concern began to grow. A servant was sent to her room. The door was unlocked. The room was empty. Her personal belongings remained inside. Her clothing, books, and writing materials were undisturbed. There was no sign that she had left the house. As the hours passed, the atmosphere shifted. The household moved from mild concern to unease. A search was conducted, first through the lower floors, then the servants' quarters, and finally upward toward the attic. It was there, among the stored trunks and unused furniture, that the body was found. The governess lay motionless on the floor of the attic, partially obscured by shadows. There were no immediate signs of struggle visible from a distance, no overturned furniture or broken objects. Yet it was immediately clear that she was dead. The discovery sent shockwaves through the household. Panic replaced order. Servants fled the attic in distress. The master of the house was summoned, and shortly thereafter the authorities were notified. News of the death spread quickly through the town. A governess found dead within the very house that employed her was not merely tragic, it was unsettling. The location of the body, hidden away in the attic, raised questions that could not easily be dismissed. How had she come to be there? Why had no one noticed? And most troubling of all, what had occurred within those walls that had led to her death? By the time the police arrived, the house was no longer simply a residence. It had become a place of suspicion. What followed would expose not only the details of a single death, but the fragile social structures, silent pressures, and unspoken dangers faced by those who lived on the margins of Victorian respectability. The arrival of the police transformed the household from a private domestic space into a scene of official inquiry. Uniformed constables were the first to attend, followed shortly by a plain-clothes officer assigned to oversee the initial investigation. Their priority was to secure the attic and prevent further disturbance of the body or its surroundings. The attic was poorly lit, requiring lanterns to illuminate the space. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed only by the movement of the officers. The governess's body lay near a cluster of old trunks, positioned close to one of the sloping walls beneath the roof beams. She was fully clothed, and at first glance there were no obvious signs of violence, such as extensive bloodstains or torn garments. Despite this, the circumstances were immediately considered suspicious. The attic was not an area the governess was known to use regularly, and there was no clear reason for her to have been there alone during the night. The absence of disorder suggested that whatever had occurred had not involved a violent struggle, or that any such signs had been carefully concealed. A preliminary assessment confirmed that she had been dead for several hours. Rigor mortis had begun to set in, indicating death likely occurred during the late night or early morning hours. This finding raised an immediate and troubling question. If she had died during the night, how had no one heard or noticed anything unusual? The house was not isolated. Family members slept on the lower floors, and servants occupied nearby rooms. Even the attic, though removed, was still within the structure of the house. The silence surrounding her death was itself a source of concern. The body was carefully examined where it lay. There were faint marks around the neck, subtle but unmistakable to trained eyes. These were not immediately visible from a distance and might have gone unnoticed without close inspection. No weapon was found nearby. There was no overturned furniture, no broken objects, no clear indication of an accident. The officers ordered that the attic be searched thoroughly. Trunks were opened, boxes examined, and the floorboards inspected for anything that might explain the governess's presence there. Nothing immediately stood out. No note was found, no personal item suggesting she had intended to be there for a prolonged period. Meanwhile, downstairs, members of the household were questioned separately. The master of the house stated that he had retired for the night at his usual hour and had heard nothing out of the ordinary. His wife confirmed the same. The children, sleeping on a lower floor, were unaware of anything unusual. Servants reported locking doors as normal and retiring without incident. No one could account for the governess's movements after the evening meal. Attention turned to her routine. It was established that she had conducted lessons earlier that day as usual. She had appeared quiet, but not distressed. She had taken her supper alone and excused herself early, citing preparation for the next day's lessons. After that, no one claimed to have seen her alive. The absence of witnesses complicated matters. In many Victorian households, servants were accustomed to noticing small irregularities, yet in this case, no footsteps, voices, or disturbances had been reported. Either nothing had occurred to draw attention, or someone had gone to great lengths to ensure silence. The body was removed later that day for a post-mortem examination. A physician with experience in forensic investigation was tasked with determining the precise cause of death. His findings would prove crucial. The examination confirmed that the governess had not died of natural causes. The marks on her neck were consistent with compression, indicating that she had been strangled. There were no fractures to the skull, no deep wounds, and no evidence of poisoning. Death had been deliberate, controlled, and inflicted with intent. This conclusion shifted the case from unexplained death to homicide. The method suggested a quiet killing, one that could occur without attracting attention. There was no evidence of a prolonged struggle, which raised further questions about the relationship between the governess and whoever had been with her in the attic. Was she taken by surprise? Did she trust the person who led her there? The physician estimated the time of death to be between midnight and the early hours of the morning. This window placed everyone in the house under scrutiny. With no forced entry and no signs of an intruder, investigators were faced with an unsettling likelihood. The person responsible had been inside the house. Public interest grew rapidly once the nature of the death became known. Newspapers reported the discovery with restrained but unmistakable intrigue. The idea of a governess, an emblem of respectability and moral instruction, being murdered within her employer's home struck at the heart of Victorian sensibilities. Speculation began almost immediately. Some questioned whether the governess had taken her own life, though the medical findings quickly dismissed this theory. Others whispered about impropriety, suggesting secret relationships or hidden scandals. In Victorian society, such rumors could spread rapidly, often doing lasting damage regardless of truth. The police, however, focused on evidence rather than gossip. They examined the layout of the house, noting access points, locks, and staircases. The attic stairs were narrow and creaked when used, yet no one recalled hearing footsteps. This detail troubled investigators. It suggested either that no one had ascended those stairs during the night, or that whoever did so moved with exceptional care. Attention also turned to the governess's position within the household. She was dependent, isolated, and vulnerable. Her role placed her in frequent contact with family members, yet afforded her little authority or protection. Investigators began to consider whether resentment, secrecy, or opportunity had played a role. As the day drew to a close, the house stood under a shadow. What had once been a symbol of order and respectability was now associated with secrecy and death. The attic, previously ignored, had become the center of a growing mystery. The governess's death was no longer merely a tragedy. It was a question that demanded answers. And those answers, the police suspected, lay not outside the house but within it. With the conclusion that the governess had been deliberately killed, the investigation entered a more serious and delicate phase. The police now faced the difficult task of identifying a suspect within a closed domestic environment, one governed by rigid Victorian hierarchies and unspoken rules. Unlike crimes committed in public spaces, this case offered no anonymous crowds, no strangers passing through. Every possible suspect was known, and every relationship carried implications. The household staff were the first to be examined in detail. Servants were questioned about their movements on the night of the death, their relationships with the governess, and any disagreements that may have occurred. Most accounts were uneventful. Several servants described the governess as reserved, polite, and distant, neither particularly warm nor hostile. She kept largely to herself, a common trait among governesses who existed in an uneasy position between family and staff. One servant recalled hearing faint movement above during the night, but dismissed it at the time as the house settling or a rat in the roof. Another claimed to have seen a light briefly visible in the upper part of the house long after the family had retired. These details, while intriguing, were vague and could not be independently confirmed. The master of the house came under scrutiny next. He was a man of standing in the community, financially stable and outwardly respectable. His demeanor during questioning was composed, though noticeably strained. He denied any improper relationship with the governess and stated that his interactions with her were limited to matters concerning the children's education. No evidence was found to contradict his statement, though investigators noted that such relationships were rarely documented and often concealed. His wife was also questioned at length. She described the governess as competent but emotionally distant, expressing occasional dissatisfaction with her lack of warmth toward the children. She denied any arguments or tension beyond minor household disagreements. Observers noted her calm exterior, though whether it reflected innocence or restraint was impossible to determine. The children, due to their age, were questioned only briefly and in the presence of guardians. Their statements offered no useful insight. Investigators then turned their attention to the governess's past. It was discovered that she had taken the position under modest circumstances, having previously worked in another household several counties away. Her references were acceptable but unremarkable. She had no close family nearby, no known suitors, and no documented romantic attachments. Letters found among her possessions were sparse and practical in tone, focused on employment and finances. Yet something was missing. There were gaps in her personal history, periods unaccounted for, letters removed, entries missing from her small diary. Whether these absences were deliberate or coincidental could not be established. Still, they raised questions about whether she had confided something to someone within the house, or whether she had been concealing a matter of importance. The attic itself became a focal point. Police attempted to reconstruct how the governess could have been brought there without alerting others. The narrow staircase creaked noticeably under weight, yet no one recalled hearing it used. Investigators tested the steps repeatedly and confirmed that while quiet movement was possible, it required deliberate effort. This suggested planning. The lack of defensive injuries also troubled investigators. The governess did not appear to have fought back. This implied either that she was physically overpowered quickly, or that she did not expect harm from the person who confronted her. The possibility that she had followed someone willingly into the attic could not be ignored. Rumors soon began to circulate beyond the household. Local newspapers speculated cautiously, avoiding direct accusations but raising questions about domestic secrets and hidden tensions. The governess's ambiguous social status fueled public curiosity. She was neither servant nor family, respected yet vulnerable, present yet invisible. Many readers viewed her as a tragic figure caught between worlds. Some suggested that jealousy may have played a role. Others speculated about financial disputes, inheritance matters, or inappropriate attention. None of these theories were supported by concrete evidence, but they reflected the anxieties of Victorian society regarding propriety and hidden transgressions. The police pursued every lead available. They examined correspondence, questioned former employers, and even investigated whether an outsider could have gained access to the house. Doors and windows showed no signs of forced entry. Locks were intact. The timing of the death made an external intruder highly unlikely. As days passed, the investigation began to stall. No suspect emerged with both motive and opportunity. Testimonies conflicted subtly but never dramatically. Each person's account could be explained, dismissed, or reconciled with another version of events. The evidence pointed inward, yet refused to settle on any one individual. The governess's isolation now appeared central to the case. She had lived among others but belonged to none. Her presence was tolerated, her authority limited, her voice easily overlooked. In death, she commanded attention, but in life, she may have been unheard. This realization shaped the direction of the inquiry, though it offered no immediate answers. Pressure mounted on the police to produce results, public interest intensified, and editorial columns questioned whether justice would be served or quietly abandoned. Some critics accused authorities of shielding respectable figures. Others warned against rushing to judgment in a case built on speculation. Behind closed doors, investigators debated their options. Without stronger evidence, an arrest would be risky, yet allowing the case to drift unresolved threatened public confidence. The possibility that the crime would remain officially unsolved became increasingly real. By the end of the investigation's third week, one conclusion was unavoidable. The governess had been murdered by someone who knew the house, understood its rhythms, and moved within it unnoticed. Who that person was, and whether the truth would ever be fully revealed, remained uncertain. The attic had yielded a body, but not a confession, and as the case moved toward legal proceedings, doubt rather than clarity defined the path ahead. As the investigation drew toward its conclusion, authorities faced a difficult decision. There was no shortage of suspicion, but there was a troubling lack of certainty. The evidence gathered within the household suggested opportunity and proximity, yet none of it rose to the level required for an immediate and confident prosecution. Still, public pressure mounted steadily. A governess had been found dead in the attic of a respectable home, and Victorian society demanded answers. Reluctantly, the case was brought before the courts. The inquest that followed was conducted under intense scrutiny. Witnesses from the household were called one by one to recount their movements, their interactions with the governess, and their recollections of the night in question. Their testimonies were careful, measured, and often frustratingly vague. Each person appeared anxious to cooperate while simultaneously guarding their words. The medical examiner's findings were presented in detail. He confirmed that the cause of death was manual strangulation, delivered with sufficient force to render the victim unconscious quickly. The lack of extensive defensive injuries was again emphasized, reinforcing the belief that the governess had not expected an attack. The time of death was estimated to fall within a narrow window during the early hours of the morning, when the household was quiet and movement would have gone largely unnoticed. The attic was described extensively to the court. Jurors were told of the confined space, the low beams, and the difficult access. The prosecutor argued that such a location could only have been chosen by someone familiar with the house. The defense countered that familiarity alone did not equate to guilt and warned against conclusions based on assumption rather than proof. Attention turned repeatedly to relationships. The governess's position within the household was dissected in public for the first time. Legal arguments explored the inherent vulnerability of governesses, women expected to exercise authority over children while remaining subordinate to adults. Witnesses described her isolation, her limited social interactions, and her reliance on the household for both livelihood and shelter. Speculation filled the courtroom. Was there jealousy, a concealed dispute, a secret known only to the victim and her killer? These questions hovered unanswered. Each theory lacked corroboration, yet none could be fully dismissed. Despite weeks of testimony, the proceedings produced no decisive revelation. The judge, careful in his summation, reminded the jury that suspicion was not evidence. He emphasized the necessity of certainty in criminal matters, particularly when reputations and lives hung in the balance. Victorian justice demanded restraint, even in the face of public unease. When the verdict was delivered, it reflected the ambiguity that had defined the case from the beginning. No individual was convicted of the crime. The court concluded that while the governess had undeniably been murdered, the evidence was insufficient to determine by whom. The ruling satisfied neither side. Some observers felt justice had been denied, others that restraint had prevailed over conjecture. Reaction outside the courtroom was immediate and divided. Newspapers published sharply contrasting editorials. Some accused the legal system of protecting the privileged. Others praised the court for resisting pressure and upholding due process. Letters poured into editors' offices, debating whether the governess had been failed twice, once in life and once in death. Public interest slowly shifted from outrage to reflection. The case came to symbolize broader anxieties within Victorian society. It highlighted the precarious position of governesses, the hidden tensions of domestic life, and the uncomfortable truth that violence could occur behind respectable facades without leaving clear traces. Within the household, life resumed in altered form. The family eventually relocated, the house passing into new ownership. The attic was emptied and repurposed, its grim history fading from memory for those who lived beneath its beams. Yet for the servants and neighbors who had witnessed the aftermath, the memory endured. The governess herself was laid to rest quietly. With no immediate family present, her burial attracted little attention beyond a modest notice in the local paper. No monument marked her passing. Her name survived primarily through court records and newspaper columns, preserved not by affection, but by circumstance. In later years, the case was revisited by historians and criminologists. Some argued that the truth had been deliberately obscured. Others believed the crime was the tragic result of an impulsive act that left no reliable trail. Without new evidence, every conclusion remained speculative. What endures is not certainty, but unease. A woman entered a household seeking stability and purpose. She was found dead in its highest, most forgotten space. The house closed its doors, the court closed its case, and society moved forward, leaving behind a question that is never fully settled. Who killed the governess in the attic? The answer, like the shadows beneath the roof where she was found, remains hidden.